The moment my mother handed the envelope to my brother instead of me, I understood something had already been decided long before I walked into that room. We were sitting in my parents' dining room in Plano, Texas, the same room where I'd celebrated birthdays that were forgotten 5 minutes later, promotions that earned a nod and a subject change, and one engagement announcement that somehow turned into a discussion about my brother's future. That night was supposed to be simple, a family meeting. My mother, Carol Whitman, had insisted. My father, Richard Whitman, had sounded formal on the phone, which should have warned me. Instead, I watched my younger brother, Daniel Whitman, turn the thick cream envelope over in his hands, while my name sat unspoken in the air. If you've ever felt the ground shift under you in silence, you already know what that second felt like. Before I tell you how this ends, pause here. If stories about family betrayal, quiet revenge, and delayed justice hit close to home, like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe. What comes next only makes sense if you stay. I'm Claire Whitman. I was 32 that night, old enough to know patterns, young enough to still hope I was wrong. Daniel sat across from me, his posture relaxed, confident in a way only someone who has never had to fight for oxygen in a room can be. He was 29, recently married, recently promoted, recently everything. His wife, Emily Ross Whitman, squeezed his arm, already smiling like she knew the punchline. My mother cleared her throat. "We wanted to go over the will while we're all healthy," she said, eyes fixed on the polished wood table. No surprises later. The word will landed heavier than she intended. My father leaned back in his chair. This is about responsibility, continuity, making sure the family assets are handled correctly. Family assets, not family. I work as a senior compliance manager for a medical device firm in Dallas. I oversee FDA audit readiness for 3 manufacturing facilities across 2 states. My team manages a regulatory budget of $4.2 million annually. I was promoted 2 years earlier after leading a recall mitigation that saved the company from federal penalties. No one at that table had ever asked me what I actually did. Daniel finally opened the envelope. His eyebrows lifted, just slightly. A practiced reaction. "Looks like the house, the lake property, and the investment accounts are listed here," he said, glancing up. "Mom, Dad, this is more than I expected." Emily laughed softly. "You deserve it, babe. You've always been the one carrying the family forward." I didn't interrupt. I rarely did anymore. My mother turned to me then, her smile careful. "Claire, we know this might feel sudden, but you're independent. You've always been so capable." Capable. The word they used when they wanted to explain away absence. "So I'm not listed," I said. Not accusing, just confirming. My father's jaw tightened. "You'll receive a small trust payout. $50,000. Enough to help if you ever need it. Ever need it." Like I was a risk they were managing, not a daughter they knew. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "This doesn't mean you're not important," he said, not meeting my eyes. "It's just practical." Practical. Another familiar word. I thought about Thanksgiving dinners, where my promotion announcements waited until dessert and were still interrupted. Christmas mornings, where Daniel's gifts took up the entire living room, while mine fit under a chair. The birthday last year they forgot entirely until my aunt texted. This wasn't sudden. It was cumulative. "What about Grandma's company?" I asked. "You always said it would be divided equally." My grandmother, Helen Whitman, had built a regional logistics company from a single delivery truck into a firm with contracts across North Texas. She'd left it to my father with explicit instructions. I'd read the letter after her funeral, or thought I had. My mother looked at my father. He answered. "Daniel is already involved in family operations," Richard said. "He understands the vision. Daniel works in commercial real estate. He has never stepped foot in that company. I've been reviewing their compliance gaps for 3 years," I said calmly. "Unpaid labor audits, outdated OSHA filings. You asked me to." My mother waved a hand. Informally. That wasn't official involvement. There it was, the line they always drew after using me. Emily leaned forward. "Claire, you don't even have kids. Daniel is thinking generationally." The table went quiet. I noticed my hands were steady. That surprised me. "I see," I said. The meeting ended quickly after that. They always did once my questions disrupted the script. I drove home to my apartment in uptown Dallas, parked in my assigned garage spot, and sat in my car with the engine off. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I replayed details, tone, timing, the envelope. The decision wasn't about inheritance. It was about exclusion. 2 days later, I received an email from a law firm I didn't recognize. Subject line: clarification regarding Whitman family holdings. That's when I realized this wasn't just emotional. It was structural. The firm was Keller & Boone, estate attorneys based in Frisco. They requested a call to address potential concerns. Potential. As if my place in my own family were a footnote. I scheduled the call for Friday at 10 a.m. That night, I pulled out the folder I'd kept from my grandmother's estate, the one no one asked about. Inside was her handwritten letter, dated 3 months before her death, naming me as a contingency executor if conflicts arose. I hadn't imagined that line. I read it twice. Then, a third time. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Hope you're okay. This wasn't meant to hurt you. I didn't reply, because something had shifted. Quietly. Permanently. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. Friday was coming. And with it, the truth they assumed I'd never question. Friday morning arrived without drama. No thunder, no sleepless night, no racing heart. That alone told me something had changed. At 9:42 a.m., I was already seated in my home office, laptop open, legal pad aligned with the edge of the desk. I wore the same charcoal blazer I used for FDA audits, not because anyone would see it, but because it reminded me who I was when things got complicated. Calm, methodical, hard to corner. The call from Keller & Boone came exactly on time. Ms. Claire Whitman, a man said, voice smooth, practiced. This is Jonathan Keller. He didn't ask how I was. People like him never do when they think they're calling from a position of authority. I understand you wanted to clarify some details regarding the Whitman family holdings, he continued. Specifically your role, or lack thereof, in the estate planning. That's correct, I said. I received your email. A pause. Paper shuffling. I pictured him glancing at a file with my name on it, probably thinner than the one labeled Daniel Whitman. Our clients, Richard and Carol Whitman, wanted to ensure transparency, he said. There were concerns you might feel excluded. He said the word gently, like a courtesy. I am excluded, I replied, so transparency would be appreciated. Another pause. This one longer. Well, Jonathan Keller said carefully, your parents revised their estate plan last year. The majority of assets, including Whitman Logistics Group, have been designated to your brother, Daniel Whitman. I'm aware. Your allocation is limited to a fixed trust disbursement. Non-controlling. No board authority. There it was, reduced to bullet points. I have a question, I said. Did you review Helen Whitman's final letter of intent before executing those changes? Silence. Not polite silence. Operational silence. I'm referring to the addendum dated March 12th, 3 months before her death, I continued. The one that names a contingency executor in the event of family conflict. Jonathan Keller cleared his throat. I'm not sure that document is legally binding. I didn't ask if it was binding, I said. I asked if you reviewed it. Another pause. Shorter now. Sharper. No, he admitted. We were instructed to proceed based on the most recent will by my parents. I see, I said. Then you may want to review it before we speak again. His tone shifted, slightly less smooth. Ms. Whitman, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, I said, that my grandmother anticipated this outcome, and that I have documentation your firm has not evaluated. The call ended politely, too politely. At 10:19 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was my mother. Claire, Carol said, not bothering with hello. Why are you calling lawyers? I didn't call them, I replied. They called me. That's not the point, she snapped. You're creating tension. I stared out the window at the parking lot below. People moving through their lives, unaware of how families fracture quietly, behind closed doors. You created tension when you removed me, I said. I'm responding. You're overreacting, she said. This is exactly why your father and I worried. I almost smiled. The predictability was almost comforting. Worried about what? I asked. That I'd notice? She exhaled sharply. Daniel has responsibilities now. A wife, a future. And I don't? I asked. That's not what I meant, she said quickly. It never is. After we hung up, I did something I'd avoided for years. I called my grandmother's former accountant, Samuel Price. He'd retired 2 years earlier, but he still answered his office line. Claire Whitman, he said warmly. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. That sentence landed harder than any accusation. You were? I asked. Your grandmother worried about you, Samuel said. Not because you were weak, because she knew they'd overlook you. I closed my eyes. She told me to keep copies of everything, he continued, just in case. We spoke for an hour. He explained asset transfers that didn't align with standard procedure. Shares moved quietly. Valuations adjusted downward right before reassignment. Legal, but strategic. Your brother didn't do this alone, Samuel said. Someone advised your parents. That night, Daniel called me. Why are you digging into this? He asked, irritation barely masked. This is turning into a thing. It was already a thing, I said. You just weren't on the receiving end. You're making us look bad, he said. Emily's parents are asking questions. There it was. Reputation. Always the real currency. Did you know about Grandma's letter? I asked. He hesitated, just long enough. No, he said, too quickly. I let the silence stretch. Claire, he added, softer now. You don't need this. You've always done fine on your own. That phrase again. The compliment that doubles as a dismissal. I didn't ask to be independent, I said. I adapted. He sighed. What do you want? I thought about that after we hung up. Really thought about it. What I wanted wasn't money, or the company, or an apology that would never be specific enough to matter. I wanted the truth acknowledged, in writing, in public if necessary. The following Monday, I requested a formal copy of my grandmother's estate file from the county clerk. Perfectly legal, perfectly boring. The kind of move no one panics about until it's too late. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived. Inside was more than a letter. There were signatures, dates, instructions that had been ignored, and one clause that changed everything. If any beneficiary altered asset distribution in a way that directly excluded a named descendant without due cause, the executor was required to initiate a review. Mandatory, not optional. I was the named executor in that scenario. I sat back in my chair and let that settle. They hadn't just overlooked me. They'd gambled that I would stay quiet. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Because once you stop asking for inclusion and start asserting standing, the rules change. And they had no idea what they'd just triggered. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not Daniel, not my parents, not even Samuel Price, who had already given me more honesty than my family ever had. Power, I was learning, worked best when it arrived quietly. The following week, I took 2 days off work. I told my director it was personal, which in my world meant non-negotiable. On Tuesday morning, I drove to Fort Worth to meet with an attorney my grandmother had trusted long before Keller and Boone entered the picture. Her name was Margaret Sloan. Margaret Sloan was in her early 60s, wore no jewelry except a plain gold watch, and didn't smile until she understood exactly who you were and why you were in her office. My grandmother had once described her as the woman you hire when you're tired of being underestimated. Margaret listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The dinner, the envelope, the revised will, the missing letter, the clause naming me executor under exclusion conditions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. They thought you wouldn't read, she said calmly. I blinked. Excuse me? They assumed you'd be hurt, she continued. Maybe angry, but not strategic. Families like yours rely on emotional fatigue. They wait for you to get tired and move on. That landed deeper than anything else had. Legally, she went on, you have standing. Not ownership, not yet. But standing is leverage. What does that mean in practice? I asked. It means you can force disclosure, Margaret said. Audits, valuations, communications between your parents, your brother, and their advisors. And once you do that, things get uncomfortable. I thought of Daniel's voice on the phone, Emily's smile at the dinner table, My mother's careful phrasing. "I don't want a war," I said. Margaret nodded. "Of course not. You want the truth to surface on its own." She paused. "Be aware, though. Once you move forward, they'll stop seeing you as family and start seeing you as a threat." I didn't answer right away because the truth was, I already was. We filed a notice of review that afternoon. Not a lawsuit, not yet. A formal request invoking the contingency clause. Enough to trigger legal obligation without escalation. Margaret sent it certified. Signature required. 2 days later, my father showed up at my apartment. He hadn't been there in years. Richard Whitman stood in my doorway, like a man who expected the floor to shift beneath him. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller. The confidence he wore at the dinner table hadn't followed him here. "You blindsided us," he said without greeting. "I followed the process," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "You taught me that." He didn't sit, just stood in the middle of my living room, hands clasped behind his back. "This is unnecessary," he said. "We can talk like adults." "We tried that," I said, "at dinner." "That wasn't a negotiation," he snapped, then caught himself, lowered his voice. "Claire, you're misinterpreting intentions." I leaned against the counter. "Then clarify them," he sighed. The sound carried years of authority he was no longer sure applied. "Daniel needed the company," he said. "Continuity matters. Investors don't like uncertainty." "Whitman Logistics isn't public," I said. "There are no investors." He frowned. "Just briefly." "Not yet," he said. That was new. "You're planning to sell," I said. Not a question. He didn't deny it. "Daniel has connections," he said. "Commercial buyers, private equity." "And I don't?" I asked. "You work in compliance," he said. "You slow things down." There it was, the unfiltered version. "I protect companies from imploding," I replied, "including Grandma's. You know that." He looked away. "What you're doing," he said, "could complicate things." "That depends," I said, "on what you've been hiding." He stiffened. Nothing. The timing of his visit answered that for me. That night, my phone lit up with a message from Emily. I didn't know if she'd meant to text me or Daniel. She wrote, "Is this going to mess up the acquisition timeline?" I stared at the screen. Plural meetings. Private equity. Investors that didn't exist yet, but were being courted. My grandmother's company wasn't being passed down. It was being packaged. The next week was quiet on the surface. No calls, no texts. Just formal notices arriving from Keller and Boone, requesting extensions, delays, clarifications. Margaret denied all of them. "Stonewalling means there's something to find," she said. On Friday afternoon, she called me herself. "We received internal emails," she said. "Your parents authorized preliminary valuations 18 months ago." "That's before Grandma died," I said. "Yes," Margaret replied. "And before the will revision." My grip tightened around my phone. "They started planning the sale while she was still alive," I said. "And while telling her they were honoring her wishes," Margaret said. That night, Daniel called again. "This has gone far enough," he said. "Dad's under a lot of stress." "So am I," I replied. "You don't understand what's at stake," he said. "I understand exactly what's at stake," I said. "You just assumed I wouldn't notice." There was a long pause. "What do you want?" he asked again. This time, I didn't hesitate. "I want everything paused," I said. "No sale, no transfers, full disclosure." "That could cost us millions," he said. I thought of my grandmother's handwriting, of the clause they ignored. "Then you should have thought about that," I said, before cutting me out. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was afraid. I ended the call first. That weekend, Margaret forwarded me a preliminary report. Asset movements, legal gaps, one unsigned authorization that could invalidate the entire process. And at the bottom of the file, a note. "If this proceeds to court, reputational exposure will be significant." I closed my laptop and sat very still, because the story my family told themselves was that I was emotional, passive, replaceable. What they were about to learn was that I had something far more dangerous. I had receipts. And I was no longer asking to be part of the conversation. I was deciding when it would happen. The first thing my family did when they realized I wasn't backing down was change the narrative. Not the facts, just the story around them. It started quietly. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in months texted me to ask if everything was okay at work. A cousin commented under one of my LinkedIn posts, joking about corporate burnout. By Wednesday, my mother called to tell me she was worried about my stress levels. "You've always pushed yourself too hard," Carol said gently. "This fixation can't be healthy." Fixation. Another word meant to shrink me. "I'm not fixated," I replied. "I'm informed." She sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. "You're seeing betrayal where there isn't any." I didn't argue. I was done explaining. That Friday, Margaret Sloan forwarded me something. She didn't comment on it first. Just an attachment. A forwarded email chain. The sender was Daniel. The recipient was a private equity firm based in Chicago. Hawthorne Ridge Capital. Subject line: Preliminary Overview. Whitman Logistics Group. The date was 11 months before my grandmother died. I read it slowly. Then again. Daniel positioned himself as acting director. Listed projected EBITDA increases based on workforce restructuring. Included language about streamlining legacy oversight. Legacy oversight. That was me. My grandmother. Anyone who asked questions. I sat back in my chair and let the pattern settle into place. This wasn't favoritism alone. This was removal. They weren't just choosing Daniel over me. They were erasing obstacles. Margaret called an hour later. "This email complicates things," she said. "He misrepresented authority and intent." "Is it illegal?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. "But it is discoverable. And embarrassing." Embarrassment is leverage's quieter cousin. That evening, my father called again. His voice was different this time. Controlled, but thin. "We need to meet," Richard said. "In person. All of us." I agreed. Not because I wanted closure, because timing matters. We met Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. Same dining room, same oak table. Different energy. Daniel was already there. Emily sat beside him, arms folded tight across her chest. My mother hovered near the kitchen, pretending to rearrange napkins. No one offered me a drink. "We're concerned," Richard began, hands flat on the table. "This has gone further than anyone intended." "Intended by whom?" I asked. Daniel shot me a look. "You're making this adversarial." "I didn't," I said. "The documents did." Emily leaned forward. "Claire, do you have any idea what this could do to Daniel's career?" There it was. The shift from denial to damage control. "I know exactly," I said. "I work in compliance, remember?" My mother finally sat. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why now?" "Because you never listen when I'm calm," I thought. Aloud, I said. "Because Grandma trusted me, and you ignored her." "That's not fair," my father snapped. "We did what was best for the family." "You did what was best for a transaction," I said. Silence stretched. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Look, we can fix this. Maybe restructure the trust. Give you a larger payout." "A buyout." "I don't want compensation," I said. "I want accountability." Emily scoffed. "For what? Being practical?" "For lying," I replied. "For planning a sale behind Grandma's back. For rewriting history and hoping I wouldn't notice." My father stood abruptly. "This is enough." "No," I said quietly. "This is overdue." Margaret had warned me this moment would come. The one where they stop minimizing and start posturing. "I've already submitted the notice of review," I continued. "The sale is frozen, pending disclosure." My mother's face went pale. "You can't do that." "I already did." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Do you know what Hawthorne Ridge will do if this leaks?" I met his eyes. "I know what they'll do if they discover misrepresentation." That landed. Emily stood. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said. I'm refusing to hold it together with silence. The meeting ended without resolution. No apologies, no concessions. Just tension so thick it followed me out the door. 2 days later, Hawthorne Ridge Capital requested an independent audit. Not from us, from the board, which meant someone had talked. Margaret called that afternoon. "They're nervous," she said. "And nervous buyers dig." "What happens now?" I asked. "They'll want clean narratives," she replied, "and someone to blame." That night, Daniel texted me for the first time without anger. "Please, let's talk. Just us." I stared at the message longer than necessary, because I knew what this was. When institutions get involved, families look for scapegoats, and I had just become Inconvenient. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email chain to Margaret and asked one question. What happens if the executor invokes fiduciary breach? She answered an hour later. Then the sale collapses, and responsibility gets very specific. I slept well that night. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from my mother and a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. Ms. Whitman, a man said, "This is Andrew Cole from Hawthorne Ridge Capital. We need to discuss your grandmother." That was the moment I knew the story had shifted beyond my family. Because once outside money enters the room, truth stops being negotiable. And the people who built their power on assumption start losing control fast. I called him back. And as the line connected, I realized something with complete clarity. They had underestimated me for decades. But Hawthorne Ridge wouldn't. And neither would the law. Andrew Cole didn't sound alarmed. That was what worried me. His voice was steady, measured. The kind that belonged to someone who made a living staying calm, while other people panicked. "Miss Claire Whitman," he said. "Thank you for calling me back." "For clarity," I replied. "I'm not a shareholder." "Not yet," he said lightly. "But you are a named contingency executor, which makes you relevant." Relevant, not emotional, not difficult. I appreciated that. "We're conducting an internal risk review," Andrew continued. "Part of that involves understanding family dynamics that could impact governance." Family dynamics, another polite term for mess. "What would you like to know?" I asked. "Your grandmother," he said. "Helen Whitman. Was she aware your parents were exploring a sale?" "No," I said. "She believed the company would remain family-operated." "That's consistent with what we suspected," Andrew replied. "She left notes. Informal, but pointed. Notes. Plural." "Did she ever express concerns about Daniel Whitman's role?" he asked. I chose my words carefully. "She respected ambition," I said. "But she didn't trust shortcuts." That was true. And enough. "Understood," he said. "One more question. Were you pressured to stay uninvolved?" "Yes." There was a pause, a pen scratching on paper. "That helps," Andrew said. "We'll be in touch." The call ended cleanly. No promises, no threats. Just information exchanged. That afternoon, Margaret Sloan called with an update. "Hawthorne Ridge has suspended negotiations," she said. "They're reassessing governance risk." "Which means?" I asked. "Which means your brother just lost leverage he thought was guaranteed." That evening, my father called again. Not angry this time. Tired. "You spoke to the buyers," Richard said. "They spoke to me," I replied. "You didn't have to say anything," he said. "I told the truth," I said. Silence. "We built this company from nothing," he said finally. "You inherited it," I corrected. "Grandma built it." He exhaled. "You're being rigid." "I'm being accurate." Another pause. "What do you want?" he asked. Third time, same question, different weight. "I want the original will honored," I said, "and an independent trustee appointed." "That removes us," he said. "Yes," I replied. That was the moment he understood. Not just the stakes, the shift. The next day, Daniel showed up at my office building. Security called me first. "There's a Daniel Whitman asking for you," the guard said. "He looks intense." I met him in the lobby. He looked like he hadn't slept. His suit was wrinkled, his confidence frayed at the edges. "You went behind my back," he said. "You went behind Grandma's," I replied. "This deal was my future," he snapped. "No," I said. "It was your exit." He laughed bitterly. "You think you're saving something? You're blowing it up." "I'm letting it be seen," I said. People walked past us, unaware of the quiet collapse happening between siblings. "You were never meant to run this company," he said, voice low. "You're too cautious." "And you're too careless," I replied. He stared at me. For a moment, I saw something real there. Not malice. Fear. "They'll come after me," he said. "The board. The investors." "Then tell the truth," I said. "They won't forgive it," he said. "I'm not asking them to," I replied. "I'm asking them to know." He left without another word. That weekend, my parents called a family meeting. Again. This time, extended. Aunts, uncles, the people who'd been fed a version of events that painted me as unstable. I didn't attend. Instead, Margaret filed a formal motion alleging breach of fiduciary duty. The language was dry, precise, devastating. Monday morning, Whitman Logistics Group's board convened an emergency session. By Tuesday, my father was no longer acting chair. By Wednesday, Daniel had stepped down temporarily. The phrasing was generous. The reality was not. That night, my mother called me in tears. "You've humiliated us," she said. "I didn't," I replied. "I documented." "You could have handled this privately," she said. "You taught me not to," I said. She hung up. 2 weeks later, Hawthorne Ridge formally withdrew. The sale was dead. The company remained intact. Bruised, exposed, but still standing. Margaret called me that Friday. "The board is appointing an independent trustee," she said. "They've asked for your input." "My input," I repeated. "They trust you," she said. "You didn't posture. You didn't threaten. You provided facts." I closed my eyes. For the first time, someone in this process saw me clearly. "What happens to my parents?" I asked. "They lose control," Margaret said. "Not their livelihood, just their narrative." "And Daniel, he'll land somewhere," she said. "People like him always do." But not where he expected. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and opened my grandmother's letter again. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, was a sentence I hadn't noticed before. "If they try to erase you, let them see you instead." I understood it now. This wasn't revenge. Not the loud kind. This was delayed justice. Cold, precise, unavoidable. And it wasn't over yet. Because when people lose power they never thought they'd be questioned on, they don't reflect. They retaliate. And my family was just beginning to realize I was no longer the easiest target. I was the one they should have listened to all along. Power doesn't disappear when it's taken away. It looks for somewhere else to land. I understood that the week after the board removed my father as acting chair, the silence from my parents wasn't peace. It was regrouping. It started with small things. My health insurance portal locked me out. A clerical error, I was told. Then my credit monitoring service flagged a soft inquiry tied to a legacy family trust I wasn't supposed to be associated with anymore. Then a colleague at work asked, casually, if everything was okay at home. Someone had heard I was going through something. Narratives travel faster than facts. Margaret Sloan noticed it too. "They're leaking," she said over the phone. "Not documents, impressions." "About me?" I asked. "About your stability," she replied. "Your motives. Whether this was emotional." I almost laughed. Of course it was emotional. Just not in the way they wanted. "Is it working?" I asked. "Not with the people who matter," Margaret said. "But it's noise. And noise is meant to exhaust you." That night, my mother showed up again, unannounced. This time, alone. Carol Whitman stood outside my apartment door, with a look I hadn't seen before. Not authority, not disappointment, fear. "Can we talk?" she asked. I let her in. She sat on the edge of my couch, hands folded in her lap like she was bracing for impact. "You've changed," she said. "No," I replied. "I stopped compensating." She winced. "You don't understand how exposed we are." I leaned against the counter. "I understand exactly. People are asking questions," she said. "Extended family, church friends, your father's colleagues." "That's how transparency works," I said. Her voice trembled. "They think we manipulated the estate." I didn't answer. "Did we?" she asked quietly. That question almost broke me. Almost. "You know the answer," I said. She looked down at her hands. "We thought we were protecting Daniel." "And what about me?" I asked. She didn't respond. After she left, I sat in the dark for a long time. Not grieving, assessing. The next morning, Margaret forwarded me a subpoena. Not for me. For Daniel. Hawthorne Ridge wasn't finished. They'd initiated a forensic review of Daniel's communications with potential buyers. His personal email, his business accounts. Everything tied to Whitman Logistics. Daniel called me an hour later. "They're tearing through my files," he said. Panic finally bleeding through. "Every email, every draft. This is your fault." "No," I said. "This is documentation." "They're saying I misled them," he said. "That I overstated authority." "You did," I replied. "I was trying to move fast," he said. "You don't understand how deals work." "I understand how governance works," I said. "And you ignored it." He went quiet. "If this goes to litigation," he said, "they'll blacklist me." "That's a consequence," I said. "Not a surprise." "You could stop this," he said. I closed my eyes. "How?" I asked. "Withdraw the review," he said. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding." "And lie?" I asked. "For family," he said. There it was. The final ask. "I already chose family," I said. just not the version that required my silence. He hung up. 2 days later, the board requested my presence at a closed session. Margaret joined me. So did Samuel Price, my grandmother's former accountant. The boardroom was neutral. Glass walls. No photos. No history. Just decisions. The interim chair, a woman named Patricia Klein, looked at me steadily. "We owe you an apology," she said. "We failed to see what was happening." "You saw what you were shown," I replied. "We're appointing a permanent independent trustee," Patricia continued. "And we'd like you to serve as compliance liaison." Liaison. Not control, not ownership. Oversight. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're the only one who didn't try to profit from this," she said. "You protected the company without trying to own it." I thought of every family dinner where I'd been told I wasn't ambitious enough. "I'll consider it," I said. That afternoon, my father sent me an email. Not a call, not a visit. An email. It was long, defensive, carefully worded. He blamed advisors, pressure, timing. He didn't apologize. At the bottom, he wrote, "I hope one day you understand why we did what we did." I deleted it. Understanding doesn't require agreement. That weekend, a local business journal published a brief article, "Whitman Logistics Sale Delayed Amid Governance Review." No names, no accusations, just facts. But in a town like ours, facts are enough. My aunt stopped calling. My uncle sent a vague message about loyalty. Emily blocked me on social media. Daniel's LinkedIn profile quietly updated. Open to new opportunities. And I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because they were struggling, but because I no longer was. Monday morning, I accepted the board's offer. I would oversee compliance during the transition. Temporary, defined, paid. It wasn't revenge. It was structure. That evening, as I reviewed the first batch of internal documents, I found something else. A memo, drafted by Daniel, never sent. It outlined a plan to consolidate decision-making authority under himself post-sale. In it, he referred to me as a potential interference risk. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I forwarded the memo to Margaret with a single line, "This may matter." She replied minutes later, "It will." I shut my laptop and sat back. The family I thought I had was gone. In its place was something clearer, harder, truer. I wasn't being punished anymore. I was being recognized. And for people who built their power on dismissal, that recognition was the most dangerous thing of all. Because once you're seen, you can't be erased again. And my family was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The retaliation didn't come from where I expected. It didn't come from my parents, who had retreated into quiet damage control. It didn't come from Daniel, who was too busy scrambling to preserve his resume. It came from someone who had been watching all along. Emily Ross Whitman. I found out on a Tuesday morning when Margaret Sloan called me before 8 a.m., which she never did unless something had already gone wrong. She filed a complaint, Margaret said. Not against the company, against you. I sat up in bed. What kind of complaint? Ethics. Conflict of interest. She alleges you used inside access to sabotage the sale. I let that sink in. On what grounds? I asked. She claims you acted out of personal resentment, Margaret replied, and that your role as compliance liaison is inappropriate given family involvement. Of course she did. Emily had always understood optics better than substance. She'd built her confidence on proximity to power, not accountability. Who did she file with? I asked. The State Ethics Board, Margaret said, and the company's insurer. That explained the timing. She's trying to poison the well, I said. Yes, Margaret agreed, but poorly. The complaint was thin. Emotional language. No documentation, no timeline, just implication. Still, implications trigger reviews. The board suspended my access pending investigation. Temporary, procedural, but public enough to sting. By noon, my director at work called me into his office. "I'm not concerned," he said carefully, "but I need to ask. Is any of this going to touch us?" "No," I said, "and I can put that in writing." He nodded. "Do that." By evening, my phone was lighting up with messages from family members who hadn't spoken to me in months. Concern, confusion, thinly veiled accusation. Emily had made sure of that. That night, Daniel finally called again. "Did you know she was going to do this?" he asked. "No," I I said. She thinks you're trying to ruin us, he said. I'm trying to stop lying, I replied. She's scared, he said. So am I said. I just didn't turn it into a weapon. 2 days later, I sat across from the ethics investigator. Her name was Renee Holloway. Early 40s. No nonsense. She didn't smile. Why are you here? She asked. To answer questions, I said. Not your version, she said. The verifiable one. I appreciated her immediately. I walked her through everything. Dates, emails, the contingency clause, my limited role, the board's invitation. I didn't defend myself emotionally. I didn't mention hurt. I didn't talk about family dynamics. I let the paper speak. Renee flipped through the documents, her expression unreadable. Do you benefit financially from the sale collapsing? She asked. No, I said. My compensation is fixed. Do you benefit emotionally? She asked. I paused. I benefit from accuracy, I said. If that's emotional, then yes. She looked up. For the first time. The review lasted a week. During that week, my mother called me every night and hung up without leaving a message. Daniel sent one text. Just one. She didn't mean for it to get this bad. I didn't reply. On Friday afternoon, Margaret called. The relief washed through me, but it was quiet. Controlled. There's more, she added. The investigator flagged Emily's complaint as retaliatory. That was worse for them than anything else. Because retaliation sticks. The board reinstated my access that evening and added a clause. Any further interference would be escalated externally. Emily blocked me again. 2 days later, she posted a vague message online about betrayal and women tearing other women down. It didn't get much traction. People pay attention to patterns. The following Monday, the board convened again. They voted to formally separate family members from governance roles. Permanently. My father's name was removed from letterhead. Daniel was officially terminated. Not with drama, with documentation. That night, Daniel showed up at my apartment. He looked smaller than I remembered. No suit, no posture. I lost everything, he said. No, I replied. You lost control. He stared at the floor. You could have warned me, he said. I did, I replied. For years. You just didn't hear it as warning. He laughed once. Bitter. Emily's leaving. I didn't respond. She says I'm weak, he continued. That I should have handled you. That word again. I'm sorry, he said finally. It wasn't clean. It wasn't complete. But it was the first time he'd said it without bargaining. I nodded. I believe you, I said. Now. He left shortly after. I locked the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of the week settle. The accusation hadn't destroyed me. It had clarified everything. Who would weaponize? Who would fold? Who would face consequences? And who, finally, would stand? I opened my laptop and reviewed the next phase documents. Trust restructuring. Oversight transition. Legacy protection. My grandmother's company wasn't being sold. It was being stabilized, and I was no longer just reacting to betrayal. I was shaping the outcome, coldly, carefully, with no apology for finally choosing myself. Stability is not quiet. It just sounds boring to people who mistake chaos for momentum. By the time the board finalized the restructuring, the public drama had already burned itself out. No lawsuits, no headlines. Just a series of administrative decisions that quietly rewired power away from people who had assumed it was permanent. That's when the real consequences started. The first sign came from the bank. Whitman Logistics' primary lender requested revised personal guarantees. My father's name was no longer sufficient. The new trustee wanted separation, clean lines, no family leverage. My father called me that afternoon. They're asking me to refinance, Richard said, voice tight. This affects my retirement. I know, I said. You could explain to them, he pressed. Tell them I'm not a risk. I'm not in that role, I replied. Silence. For decades, my parents had believed proximity to power meant influence. They were learning that structure doesn't negotiate with nostalgia. A week later, my mother invited me to lunch. Neutral territory. A quiet bistro off Preston Road. No family photos on the walls. No history to lean on. Carol Whitman arrived early. She looked carefully put together, like she'd rehearsed the version of herself she wanted me to see. I don't recognize you, she said after reorder. I don't recognize the version of you that needed me small, I replied. She flinched. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "We just trusted Daniel more." "With power," I said, "not character." Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. She'd learned to control that, too. "Your father is struggling," she said. "He feels replaced." "He was," I said, "by process." She shook her head. "Family shouldn't work this way." "Family shouldn't require silence," I replied. We finished lunch politely. Nothing resolved, but something settled. Later that week, the trustee requested a full review of employment contracts tied to the pre-sale plan. That's when Daniel's severance package unraveled. The terms he'd negotiated for himself assumed a completed acquisition. Without it, the clauses didn't trigger. No golden parachute, no advisory role, just a termination letter and 30 days of benefits. Daniel didn't call me this time. Emily did. Her number flashed on my screen late Friday night. I almost didn't answer. "Almost. You did this," she said without greeting. "I didn't," I replied. "I stopped it." "You humiliated us," she snapped. "You tried to sideline me," I said, repeatedly. "You could have taken the payout," she said. "You could have walked away richer and quieter." "And disappeared," I said, "like you wanted." She went silent. "You never belonged in that world," she said finally. "You're too rigid, too moral." I smiled. She couldn't see it, but I felt it. "That's why it survived," I said. She hung up. The next morning, Margaret Sloan forwarded me an internal memo from Hawthorne Ridge. They'd moved on, invested elsewhere, quietly. At the bottom of the email, Andrew Cole had added a note. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing." I closed the message and sat back. Right and easy are rarely the same. That weekend, the board held a formal acknowledgement meeting. No press, no speeches, just a vote recorded into minutes. Helen Whitman's original intent was restored. The company would remain privately held, profits reinvested, expansion gradual, oversight external. And I was appointed permanent compliance advisor, not because I asked, because they trusted restraint. After the meeting, Patricia Klein pulled me aside. "You could have burned this down," she said. "You chose not to." "I grew up watching what happens when people confuse winning with control," I replied. She nodded. "You changed the trajectory." That night, I drove past my parents' house without stopping. The lights were on, curtains drawn. For the first time, I didn't feel pulled inside by obligation. I felt free. The revenge everyone expects is loud, punitive, final. This wasn't that. This was consequence. And consequence has a way of lingering long after the shouting stops. Because when systems change, people have to live inside what they built. And my family was just beginning to understand the cost of choosing convenience over integrity. As for me, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fast. What replaced it was colder, clearer, respect for myself, and an unshakable certainty that the part they tried to erase had become the one thing holding everything together. The story wasn't over, but the balance had shifted, and this time, it wasn't going back. The strangest part wasn't watching my family lose influence. It was watching them realize no one was coming to restore it. The first holiday after everything happened was Thanksgiving. For the first time in my life, I didn't receive a group text about plans. No passive-aggressive scheduling, no reminders about what time to arrive. Silence. I spent the morning hiking Cedar Ridge Preserve with a colleague from work, someone who knew nothing about Whitman logistics or wills or betrayal. We talked about trail maintenance and favorite coffee shops, normal things. At noon, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. "We're having a small dinner, if you want to come." No apology, no acknowledgement. Just an invitation, shaped like an afterthought. I stared at it longer than necessary. Then I typed back, "I already have plans. Hope you're well." That was it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. The following week, a letter arrived from the county clerk's office. Routine. Procedural. It confirmed the updated filing of the Whitman estate documents, reflecting the restored governance structure and the appointment of an external trustee. My name appeared in the margins as compliance advisor and contingency executor. Not center stage, not erased. Exactly where I belonged. At work, things shifted too. My director invited me into a closed-door meeting with senior leadership. Not about family, about strategy. "We want you to lead the internal audit response team for our Midwest expansion," he said. "It's a promotion. Title, Budget Authority. A team of 14. No congratulations balloon. No applause. Just trust." I accepted without hesitation. 2 days later, Daniel emailed me. Not called, emailed. Subject line: trying to understand. The message was long, messy, defensive in places, reflective in others. He admitted he'd assumed I would stay quiet. That I always had. He wrote that losing the company forced him to see how much of his identity was built on borrowed authority. That Emily leaving had been inevitable. That he didn't know what came next. He ended with, "I don't know if we can fix this, but I wanted you to know I see it now." I didn't respond right away. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need to be seen anymore. A week later, I ran into my aunt at the grocery store, the one who'd sent the loyalty message. She looked uncomfortable, hesitant. "I heard things settled," she said. "They did," I replied. "You didn't have to take it that far," she added. I met her eyes. It was already far. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. She nodded slowly, like someone filing away a lesson she wouldn't apply to herself. The real shift came in December. The trustees scheduled a year-end review. Numbers, projections, governance outcomes. The company was stable, profitable. Smaller than the sale would have made it, but stronger. No one mentioned Daniel's name. After the meeting, Samuel Price called me. "Your grandmother would be relieved," he said. I believed him. That night, I found myself rereading her letter again, the one she'd written before anyone knew they'd need it. This time, I noticed something else in the margins, a line I'd skimmed before. "They will tell you you're difficult when you stop being convenient." I smiled. Because that had been true long before the will. The week before Christmas, my mother called. Her voice was careful, controlled. "Your father wants to know if you'll come by," she said, "just for an hour." I considered it. Not because I felt obligated, because I wanted to see who they were now. I went on a Sunday afternoon. Daylight, boundaries intact. The house looked the same, decorated, familiar, smaller than I remembered. My father greeted me at the door. Awkward, uncertain. We sat in the living room. No dinner table, no documents. He spoke first. "I was wrong," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just factual. "I thought control was leadership," he continued. "I thought success meant deciding outcomes." I waited. "I didn't see you," he said. Not clearly. It wasn't everything, but it was real. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "I'm here to live honestly." He nodded. We didn't hug when I left, but we didn't pretend either. On Christmas morning, I woke up alone in my apartment. Sunlight through the blinds, coffee brewing, no dread, no sense of waiting for something to go wrong. I opened my email. A message from Andrew Cole at Hawthorne Ridge. They were investing in a different logistics firm, smaller, family-owned. He wrote, "They asked how to avoid what happened to Whitman Logistics. I told them to listen to the person who asks hard questions early." I closed the laptop. The story my family told themselves was that I overreacted, that I turned private matters public, that I cost them something. The truth was simpler. They tried to erase me from a future they were cashing out of. I declined. And in doing so, I kept something intact that money couldn't replace. My sense of standing, not within my family, within myself. The final consequence wasn't exile or reconciliation. It was clarity. And clarity, I was learning, is the kind of justice that doesn't need witnesses to be complete. Because when the tables turn quietly, the people who once dismissed you have to live with the sound of their own miscalculation. And that sound lasts longer than any apology. The fallout didn't explode, it thinned. That's how real consequences usually work. Not as a moment, but as a narrowing. Fewer invitations, shorter conversations. Opportunities that once appeared automatically, now requiring explanation. I noticed it first with my parents' social circle. A charity gala my mother had chaired for years, quietly reassigned leadership. A holiday fundraiser my father used to headline now featured a different name in the program. Not announced, just adjusted. No one asked them why. People simply recalibrated. My mother mentioned it once over the phone, as if talking about weather. They went with someone else this year, she said. They wanted a fresh face. Fresh face. Translation? Less risk. That happens, I replied. She was silent for a long moment. Then, is this what accountability feels like? I didn't answer, because accountability feels different depending on which side you're on. At work, the opposite happened. The Midwest audit response team I'd been assigned turned into something bigger. We identified a supplier risk that would have cost the company millions in recall exposure. The fix wasn't glamorous. It was correct. Senior leadership noticed. In January, I was promoted to Director of Regulatory Strategy. Salary increase, stock options, direct report to the COO. When the offer letter arrived, I read it twice. Not because I doubted it, because I didn't need to negotiate. It was clean. That night, Daniel texted me again. I got an interview. I waited before replying. Good luck, I wrote. Nothing else. He sent a thumbs up. Then nothing. In February, Emily filed for divorce. It wasn't dramatic. No accusations. Just irreconcilable differences. A mutual friend mentioned it to me in passing, like it was an update on the weather. She always needed someone in control, the friend said. Turns out, she married it, not him. I didn't comment. I had stopped narrating other people's lives. The trustee invited me to a quarterly review in March. Not because they had to, because they wanted my perspective. We discussed succession planning, governance safeguards, how to protect companies from family dynamics without alienating families entirely. I spoke from experience, not bitterness. People don't destroy legacies intentionally, I said. They just prioritize themselves. Patricia Klein nodded and assumed silence is agreement. That assumption had been my family's mistake. The real shift came when my mother asked me something she'd never asked before. What do you want? She said one afternoon. Not what should we do, not what's appropriate. What do you want? I took my time. I want relationships that don't require me to disappear, I said. She absorbed that quietly. In April, I received an invitation to speak at a regional compliance conference. Topic: Governance Risk in Family-Owned Enterprises. I almost declined. Then I remembered every dinner where I'd been told I was too cautious. I accepted. The room was full. Executives, advisors, people who'd seen the story play out in different forms. I didn't mention my family. I didn't have to. I talked about systems, blind spots. What happens when loyalty replaces oversight? Afterward, a woman approached me. I wish someone had said that 10 years ago, she said. It would have saved us. That was enough. Easter came and went. I didn't attend the family brunch. No one asked why. In May, my father sent me a short message. I'm stepping down from the advisory boards. Thought you should know. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied, I hope you find something that brings you peace. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't revenge. It was acceptance. That summer, Whitman Logistics announced a modest expansion. New contracts, sustainable growth, no headlines, no splash, just continuation. The legacy my grandmother built wasn't frozen in time. It was alive, adjusting, protected. One evening in June, I sat on my balcony watching the city settle into night. Lights flickering on, cars moving steadily below. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who tried harder to be chosen. She'd mistaken endurance for virtue. I didn't feel angry at her. I felt grateful. She'd survived long enough to hand things off to someone stronger. The person I'd become wasn't louder. She was clearer. And clarity, I was learning, doesn't need to announce itself. It just changes what you tolerate and what you walk away from without looking back. I thought the reckoning had already happened. I was wrong. It arrived quietly, disguised as paperwork. In late July, Margaret Sloan forwarded me a draft motion she hadn't expected to see, filed by Keller and Boone, on behalf of my parents. They weren't contesting the governance changes. They were contesting intent. They're claiming undue influence, Margaret said over the phone. Specifically, that you manipulated the process to regain relevance. I let that settle. Relevance, I repeated. Interesting choice. It's a defensive move, she said. Not a strong one. But it forces a hearing. A hearing meant testimony, depositions, records. Everything reopened. It also meant something else. Exposure. What are they hoping for? I asked. To reframe the story, Margaret replied. If they can paint you as motivated by resentment rather than compliance, they dilute the breach. And if they fail, they lose credibility permanently, she said. I closed my eyes. This wasn't about assets anymore. It was about ego, refusing to accept consequence. They're doing this because they think I'll back down, I said. Yes, Margaret replied. And because they don't know how else to sit with what they've lost. The hearing was scheduled for September. 2 weeks before it, my mother called. Not to argue, not to accuse, to ask. Will you destroy us? Carol asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away. No, I said finally. I will tell the truth. That might be worse, she said. For who? I asked. She didn't respond. Preparation for the hearing was methodical. Margaret and I reviewed every document, every email, every meeting note. I didn't rehearse emotions. I rehearsed timelines. The night before the hearing, Daniel texted me. I didn't expect that. They're scared, he wrote. Not of losing, of being seen clearly. I typed back. So was I. For a long time. The hearing took place in a small windowless room in the county administrative building. No jury, no gallery. Just a judge, 2 attorneys, and a court reporter. My parents sat on one side. I sat on the other. For the first time in my life, the physical arrangement matched the truth. Their attorney spoke first. He used words like influence, resentment, emotional proximity. Margaret responded with dates, documents, definitions. Then it was my turn. I stood, not defensively, not defiantly, just present. Ms. Whitman, the judge said, why did you initiate the review? Because the governing documents required it, I replied. And personally? He asked. Because ignoring them would have been a violation, I said, of law and trust. Did you feel excluded by your family? He asked. Yes, I said. Did that motivate you? I paused. It clarified things, I said. It didn't dictate my actions. My parents' attorney leaned forward. You benefited from the outcome. No, I replied. I benefited from compliance. The judge studied me for a long moment. And if the sale had gone through, he asked, I would have documented the risk, I said, and stepped away. Silence. The ruling came 2 weeks later. Motion denied. No undue influence. No misconduct. But the judge added something unsolicited. Ms. Whitman demonstrated restraint, where others demonstrated ambition. That line made it into the record. The aftermath was immediate. Keller and Boone withdrew representation. My parents' remaining advisory roles dissolved quietly. The last threads of assumed authority unraveled. My mother didn't call. My father didn't write. Daniel sent one final message. I don't think they know who they are without control. I read it once, then archived it. In October, I received an invitation I hadn't anticipated. A nonprofit focused on ethical governance in family enterprises asked me to join their advisory council. Not as a token, as a case study. I accepted. That same week, Whitman Logistics finalized a 5-year stability plan. Employee retention up, turnover down. The company was healthier than it had been in years. One evening, I visited my grandmother's grave. I hadn't been in months. I stood there without ceremony, without apology. Your company is safe, I said quietly. And so am I. The air was still. No answers. No signs. That was fine. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. I don't know how to talk to you without asking you to be smaller. I'm trying to learn. I stared at the words. They weren't an apology. They were something rarer. An admission. I didn't reply immediately. Some things take time. The hearing was over. The power struggle was done. But what came next would determine whether distance turned into something else. Not reconciliation. Not revenge. Something quieter. Something earned. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what that might look like. By the time winter settled in, the story had stopped circulating. No more whispers. No more updates passed along by well-meaning relatives. No more quiet glances that asked whose side I was on. There were no sides anymore. There was just distance. And unexpectedly, peace. The first real sign came in November, when the Nonprofit Advisory Council held its annual retreat in Santa Fe. 2 days of panels, closed-door workshops, and conversations that didn't revolve around status, but responsibility. On the second morning, a woman in her late 50s approached me during a break. She introduced herself as a former COO who had stepped down after a family succession imploded her company. "I read your case summary," she said. "You didn't burn anything down." "I wasn't trying to," I replied. She nodded. That's what made it land. That sentence stayed with me, because restraint rarely gets credit. It just leaves fewer ruins behind. When I returned home, there was a handwritten envelope waiting in my mailbox. From my father. I didn't open it right away. I made tea, sat down, let myself choose the moment instead of reacting to it. The letter was short, no explanations, no defenses, just this. I confused authority with love. I don't know how to fix that, but I know it cost me you. I'm sorry. I read it once, then folded it back into the envelope. It wasn't closure, but it was honest, and honesty was enough to end the fight. Thanksgiving came and went without ceremony. Christmas followed, quieter than any I remembered. I spent it with friends, chosen family, people who asked questions and listened to answers. No one compared. No one kept score. In January, I signed the final documents transferring my contingency executor role into a permanent advisory capacity. Defined boundaries, defined term, defined authority. Nothing informal. Nothing that depended on goodwill. At work, my team launched the Midwest expansion without incident. No recalls, no investigations. Clean execution. I received a performance bonus and declined a public announcement. I no longer needed visibility to feel secure. In February, my mother asked if we could have coffee, not to fix things, just to sit. We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral, bright, ordinary. She didn't bring up the past. Neither did I. She asked about my work and waited for the answer. When she spoke about herself, she didn't frame it through Daniel or my father. She spoke in first person. That was new. When we parted, she hugged me, carefully, like someone relearning how. Daniel didn't come up. He didn't need to. Some relationships end with resolution. Others end with understanding. By spring, Whitman Logistics was no longer referred to as a family company in trade circles. It was just a company. Stable, governed, unremarkable, which was exactly what my grandmother would have wanted. On the anniversary of her death, I visited her grave again. This time, I brought flowers. I didn't make promises. I didn't explain. I just stood there, steady. I didn't disappear, I said quietly. I didn't become what they needed. I stayed. That was the victory. Not the collapse of a sale, not the loss of power, not even the public acknowledgement. The real revenge wasn't humiliation. It was autonomy. It was choosing myself without needing permission. It was watching people who built their identities on control realize that control doesn't equal connection. And it never did. Some people will always believe love must be earned through obedience. Others learn, eventually, that respect is the price of access. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside by the people who should have protected you, I hope you take one thing from it. You don't need to burn bridges to reclaim your dignity. Sometimes the most powerful move is stepping back, documenting the truth, and letting consequences unfold on their own timeline. If you've lived through something similar, share your experience in the comments. Someone reading might need to know they're not imagining it. And if you want more real-life family drama stories about betrayal, boundaries, karma, and quiet revenge, like the video and subscribe. Because these stories aren't rare. They're just rarely told by the person who refused to stay silent.